Has this ever happened to you? The subtle, insidious shift, where the person you've meticulously crafted for others begins to chafe against your very soul. It's a common plight, this slow erosion of authenticity, often unnoticed until the dissonance between who you are and who you present becomes a chasm. We speak of growing, evolving, but rarely do we delve into the inherent pain of outgrowing the very versions of ourselves we believed were necessary for acceptance, for love, for belonging. It's a profound psychological journey, one that touches upon the deepest facets of our identity, the masks we wear, and the shadows we deny. Consider the story of Elara, a woman who, from a tender age, learned the art of chameleon-like adaptation. Her childhood home was a volatile landscape, a constantly shifting terrain of parental moods and expectations. Her mother, a woman of sharp edges and fragile sensitivities, required constant appeasement. Her father, a distant figure preoccupied with his own internal struggles, sought quiet compliance. Elara, a bright and perceptive child, quickly discerned that her survival, her peace, lay in becoming what each parent needed her to be. For her mother, she was the cheerful, agreeable confidant, always ready with a comforting word or a shared laugh, even when her own heart felt heavy. For her father, she was the quiet, studious daughter, never demanding, always self-sufficient. This early training in emotional labor, in the suppression of her true impulses for the sake of harmony, became the bedrock of her personality. She became a master of mirroring, reflecting back to others the qualities they wished to see, a silent promise of no disruption, no challenge. As Elara matured, this pattern deepened. In high school, she effortlessly navigated different social circles, a different version of herself for each. With the intellectuals, she was the astute debater, quoting philosophers and dissecting complex ideas. With the athletes, she was the spirited cheerleader, exuding boundless energy and enthusiasm. With the artists, she was the soulful poet, lost in reverie and abstract expression. Each persona was a performance, flawlessly executed, earning her widespread acceptance but leaving her with a gnawing sense of emptiness. "Who am I?" she would sometimes whisper to herself in the quiet solitude of her room. When no one is watching, this internal question, a flicker of authentic self struggling to ignite, was often quickly extinguished by the relentless demands of her social calendar and the comfortable hum of external validation. Her relationships, too, followed this pattern. With Liam, her first serious boyfriend, she was the supportive, nurturing partner, always prioritizing his needs, his dreams, often at the expense of her own. She absorbed his anxieties, celebrated his triumphs as if they were her own, and rarely voiced her own dissatisfactions. His casual dismissal of her burgeoning interest in ancient history, a passion she had secretly nursed, was met with a practiced smile and a quick change of subject. It's not important to him, she would rationalize, and his happiness matters more. This internal monologue, a constant negotiation with her own desires, slowly eroded her sense of self-worth. She began to see her own preferences as trivial, her opinions as secondary. The shadow of her true self, the self that yearned for intellectual rigor and passionate pursuits, retreated further into the depths of her psyche. Then came the career, a demanding corporate role that rewarded relentless ambition and a steely, unyielding facade. Elara, true to form, excelled. She became the embodiment of professional competence, the unflappable leader, the one who always had an answer, always stayed late, always took on more. Her colleagues admired her resilience, her unwavering dedication. Her superiors praised her team player attitude, unaware of the quiet exhaustion that settled over her each evening, the slow draining of her life force. She would often find herself staring blankly at the ceiling in the pre-dawn hours, a profound sense of disillusionment washing over her. The accolades felt hollow, the promotions unsatisfying. There was a peculiar irony to it all. The more successful she became in the eyes of the world, the more estranged she felt from herself. One evening, a seemingly innocuous comment from a new colleague, Sarah, shattered her carefully constructed reality. Elara had just presented a complex project proposal, delivering it with her usual polished confidence. Sarah, a quiet observer, approached her afterward. "You know," Sarah remarked gently, "you remind me of someone who's always carrying a suitcase full of everyone else's expectations. It must be heavy." The words, delivered without judgment, landed with the force of a physical blow. Elara felt a tremor deep within her, a recognition so profound it was almost painful. Sarah's observation, a simple yet powerful act of seeing beyond the persona, cracked the carefully constructed veneer. That night, Elara did not sleep. She lay awake, the words echoing in her mind. A suitcase full of everyone else's expectations. It was an apt metaphor for the burden she had unknowingly carried for decades. This introspection, triggered by an external mirror, began the arduous process of self-reclamation. She started to see the threads of conditioning, the early lessons of appeasement, woven into the very fabric of her being. The cheerful confidant, the quiet scholar, the spirited athlete, the soulful poet, the supportive girlfriend, the unyielding professional. They were all facets of a self constructed for others, not for herself. The emotional climax of this realization wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, internal implosion, a collapse of the old structure, making way for something new, something real. Elara's journey exemplifies the persona archetype, a concept deeply explored by Carl Jung. The persona is the mask we wear, the public face we present to the world, designed to make a particular impression while concealing our true nature. For Elara, this persona became a prison, albeit one built with the finest intentions of survival and acceptance. Her pain point stemmed from the profound disconnect between this outward presentation and her authentic self, leading to an ego projection where she projected her desire for acceptance onto others, believing their approval was paramount to her worth. This constant outward focus stifled her individuation process, the journey toward becoming a whole, integrated self. To break free from such a suffocating existence, you must first recognize the weight of the expectations you carry. Ask yourself, whose desires am I fulfilling? Whose narratives am I enacting? The solution lies in a courageous confrontation with your own shadow, those disowned parts of yourself that have been suppressed for the sake of fitting in. What passions have you abandoned? What opinions have you silenced? What authentic emotions have you buried? Begin by carving out small spaces for genuine self-expression. Say no when yes feels like a betrayal of your energy. Pursue a neglected hobby. Voice an unpopular opinion. Allow yourself to feel an uncomfortable emotion without immediately trying to change it. This is not about radical rebellion, but about subtle, consistent acts of self-affirmation. Like a sculptor, you must chip away at the extraneous, the imposed, to reveal the true form beneath. Your healing begins the moment you prioritize your inner landscape over external validation. It's a journey toward reclaiming your narrative, one courageous choice at a time. The path may be solitary at first, but it leads to an unparalleled freedom, a profound knowing of who you truly are, unburdened by the ghosts of who you once were for others. The quiet whisper of self-discovery, once a faint rustle in Elara's soul, began to swell into a resonant hum, bringing with it the disconcerting realization that the very relationships she had meticulously cultivated were now the most significant anchors to her past self. This is the second aspect of outgrowing who you were for others, the painful yet necessary renegotiation of your closest bonds. It's a dynamic tension, a crucible where authenticity is forged in the fires of relational change. Can a relationship truly thrive when one person sheds a skin the other has grown accustomed to? Can love endure when the foundation shifts beneath its feet? Consider the profound wisdom of Carl Rogers, a pioneer of humanistic psychology, who posited that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am, then I can change. This profound statement, seemingly simple, holds the key to navigating the relational upheaval that inevitably accompanies genuine personal growth. It implies that true transformation doesn't begin with striving to be different for others, but with the radical acceptance of your current, perhaps flawed, self. For Elara, this meant confronting the deeply ingrained patterns of people-pleasing that had defined her interactions. She had always believed that her value lay in her adaptability, her ability to anticipate and fulfill the needs of those around her. Now, she began to understand that this very adaptability had created a distorted reflection of herself in the eyes of others, one that was increasingly suffocating. Her longest-standing relationship was with Mark, her partner of nearly a decade. Mark had fallen in love with the supportive, low-maintenance Elara, the woman who rarely expressed a strong opinion that conflicted with his, who seamlessly integrated into his world, his hobbies, his social circles. She was his calm harbor, his steady anchor. As Elara embarked on her journey of self-reclamation, Mark's gentle teasing about her newfound assertiveness, her sudden interest in evening classes on philosophy, or her preference for quiet reflection over their usual bustling social engagements, slowly began to sting. "Who is this new Elara?" he would joke, a hint of genuine bewilderment in his voice. She found herself increasingly recoiling from his casual remarks, not out of anger, but from a profound sadness that he seemed to mourn the loss of a version of her that she herself was desperate to shed. One evening, Mark, frustrated by her perceived withdrawal, asked, "Why are you so distant lately? Feels like you're pulling away. Are you unhappy with us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Elara's initial impulse was to revert to her old self, to offer reassurances, to smooth over the perceived conflict. But something held her back. A newfound strength, a quiet resolve, pulsed within her. "Mark," she began, her voice steady, "I'm not pulling away from us. I'm pulling closer to myself. And in doing so, I'm discovering parts of me that I've neglected for a very long time. It feels strange, I know, but it's not about you. It's about me finding my own ground." This was a pivotal moment, a conscious refusal to engage in the old dance of appeasement. Mark, unaccustomed to such directness from Elara, was momentarily speechless. His reaction, a mix of hurt and confusion, was understandable. He was experiencing the ego projection in reverse. The image of Elara he had constructed in his mind, the ideal partner, was being challenged, and it felt like a personal affront. This is often where relationships buckle under the weight of one person's growth. The other person, invested in the familiar dynamics, may feel threatened by the emerging authentic self, perceiving it as a rejection of their own reality. Elara's journey also brought to the forefront the concept of the anima and animus, Jungian archetypes representing the unconscious feminine and masculine qualities within individuals. For too long, Elara had allowed her internalized anima, the nurturing, relational, agreeable aspect, to dominate, suppressing her animus, the assertive, rational, individuated side that craved intellectual stimulation and personal agency. Her desire to pursue philosophy, to engage in robust debates, to explore her own intellectual landscape, was the animus stirring, demanding recognition. Mark, perhaps unconsciously, was comfortable with her dominant anima, which resonated with his own projected ideal of a feminine partner. The tension in their relationship escalated. There were arguments, not explosive, but quiet, simmering disagreements born from a fundamental misunderstanding of Elara's internal shift. He saw her as changing away from him. She saw herself as changing into herself. "I feel like I don't know you anymore," Mark confessed one night, a profound sadness in his eyes. Elara felt a pang of guilt, a familiar echo of her old self that wished to alleviate his discomfort. But she stood firm. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "you are getting to know the real me for the first time." This period was agonizing. Elara found herself spending more time in solitary contemplation, journaling, meditating, and seeking out literature that spoke to her evolving understanding of self. She engaged in shadow work, confronting the fear of abandonment and disapproval that had driven her people-pleasing tendencies. She recognized that the low-maintenance persona she had worn was not a sign of strength, but a defense mechanism, a way to avoid conflict and maintain perceived harmony. The pain was real, a sharp ache of loneliness even in the presence of her partner, but it was also a cleansing fire, burning away the illusions. She began to understand what Albert Bandura's social learning theory implied, that much of our behavior is learned through observation and imitation, and for Elara, this meant unlearning decades of adaptive, yet ultimately self-defeating relational strategies. The turning point arrived not in a grand confrontation, but in a series of small, consistent actions. Elara started expressing her needs directly, even if her voice trembled slightly. She began to prioritize her own well-being, declining invitations that drained her energy, pursuing interests that genuinely ignited her passion. She accepted that not everyone would understand or even approve of this new version of her. Some friends drifted away, unable or unwilling to adjust to the less pliable, more authentic Elara. This loss, though painful, reinforced the truth. Those who truly valued her would make space for her evolution. For you, standing at the precipice of such a transformation, recognize that your growth is not a betrayal of those you love, but an act of profound self-love. As Carl Rogers emphasized, authentic relationships are built on unconditional positive regard, not on conditional acceptance of a manufactured self. When you begin to align with your true self, you invite others to do the same, or you reveal the limitations of the relationship itself. The archetype emerging in this phase is often the warrior or the rebel, not in an aggressive sense, but in the courageous act of setting boundaries and asserting one's inner truth. You may encounter resistance, and it will be challenging. But remember the words of Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher: "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Listen to your inner wisdom, and then speak your truth, even if it shakes the foundations of your current reality." Your task is to communicate your evolving self with compassion and clarity. It requires vulnerability, explaining that your changes are not against them, but for yourself. Some relationships will deepen, transformed by the authenticity you bring. Others, sadly, may wither, unable to withstand the light of your true self. This is not a failure, but a natural pruning process, making space for connections that truly nourish your soul. Embrace the discomfort, for it is the signpost of true growth. Are you ready to engage in the courageous conversations that your authentic self demands? Are you prepared to allow some connections to transform and others to gracefully recede, making space for relationships built on mutual respect for individual truth? The metamorphosis of Elara, from a mirror reflecting others' desires to a radiant embodiment of her authentic self, culminates in the profound experience of inner liberation, the third and most transformative aspect of outgrowing who you were for others. This is not merely about shedding old skins or renegotiating relationships. It is about a fundamental shift in one's psychological center, a radical embrace of self-worth that no longer relies on external validation. It is the joyous, albeit sometimes lonely, realization that your truest power lies within, independent of applause or approval. Consider the timeless wisdom of William James, a founding father of psychology, who observed, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes." This speaks directly to Elara's final ascent. Having navigated the painful unmasking of her persona and endured the relational shifts, she now faced the deepest challenge, altering her own deeply ingrained attitudes about her worth. For years, her internal narrative had been inextricably linked to her utility to others, her ability to please, her capacity to seamlessly fit into any given mold. The journey of outgrowing these limitations demanded not just outward changes, but an internal revolution of self-perception. Elara started to meticulously observe her internal dialogue. She noticed the automatic self-criticism that arose whenever she made a mistake, the insidious whispers of inadequacy when she wasn't performing perfectly. This was her shadow manifesting, the internalized voices of past disapproval, the echoes of a childhood spent striving for external harmony. She began to actively challenge these thoughts, questioning their validity, recognizing them as relics of a past self she was actively leaving behind. This was a direct application of cognitive behavioral principles, where she became her own therapist, dissecting the unhelpful thought patterns that had governed her emotional landscape. Her exploration of philosophical texts, particularly the Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, became a bedrock for her new internal architecture. She grappled with the Stoic emphasis on differentiating between what is within her control and what is not. The opinions of others, their reactions to her newfound authenticity, these were external and beyond her direct control. Her own choices, her values, her internal responses, these were entirely within her dominion. This realization was profoundly liberating. It allowed her to release the lingering anxiety about how her transformation would be received, shifting her focus to her own internal compass. "Why do you seek approval?" she would often ask herself, echoing Marcus Aurelius. "Look at how your true self is blossoming when you cultivate it." The culmination of this internal shift manifested in a powerful, symbolic act. Elara had always harbored a secret desire to paint, a passion she had stifled because it felt unproductive and self-indulgent in her former, achievement-driven life. One quiet afternoon, she bought canvases, brushes, and paints, the vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of her corporate wardrobe. She began to paint, not for exhibition, not for praise, but purely for the joy of creation. Her initial attempts were hesitant, reflecting the lingering self-doubt. But as she continued, she felt a profound sense of presence, a connection to a raw, unadulterated part of herself. The act of painting became a form of active meditation, a tangible expression of her individuation process, the journey of becoming a unique, whole individual. She found herself spending hours in her studio, lost in the flow of color and form. It was here, in the stillness of her own creative sanctuary, that she experienced a profound emotional release. The weight of years of pleasing others, the burden of the personas she had carried, lifted. There was no audience here, no expectations to meet, only the pure, unadulterated expression of her soul. This wasn't a sudden, dramatic climax, but a gentle, sustained crescendo of inner peace. The climax of her healing was not found in a grand external victory, but in the quiet, resolute act of self-acceptance. She realized that the deepest validation comes not from external sources, but from the unwavering certainty of her own true nature. This inner rebirth was palpable, radiating outward in her demeanor, her gait, the newfound sparkle in her eyes. This process reflects elements of trauma psychology, not necessarily in the sense of a grand, single traumatic event, but in the subtle, cumulative impact of consistently prioritizing external needs over internal authenticity, leading to a disconnect from self-worth. Elara's journey was about healing that deep-seated pain of self-abandonment, replacing it with a robust and unwavering sense of modern self-worth. She understood that true strength lies not in resilience against external pressures, but in the courage to be authentically vulnerable, to embrace all facets of her being, including her imperfections. Her newfound practices of walking in nature, meditating, and painting were not just hobbies, but vital acts of self-care, reinforcing her commitment to her inner world. For you, standing at this threshold, recognize that the final act of outgrowing who you were for others is an internal one. It is the courageous decision to embrace your own inherent worth, independent of any external metric. Your authentic self is not something you find, but something you cultivate through consistent self-awareness and intentional action. Practice the art of mindful observation of your thoughts. Challenge the ingrained beliefs that tell you your worth is conditional. Engage in activities that bring you genuine joy, not because they are productive or approved, but because they nourish your soul. This can be anything from daily meditation, to practicing yoga, to losing yourself in a new book, or exploring new landscapes through travel. The journey may be challenging, but the destination, a life lived in alignment with your deepest truth, is a profound reward. You are not a fragmented collection of personas, but a whole, evolving being with an infinite capacity for self-love and authentic connection. Embrace the stillness within, for it is there that your most powerful transformations unfold. Your true power is not in influencing others, but in influencing yourself to become exactly who you are meant to be, unburdened and free. This is your rebirth, a testament to the indomitable spirit of self-reclamation. If you find this story resonates with you, or if you see a piece of yourself in Elara's journey, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment to let our channel feel from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share this video as a necessary beacon of hope. Thanks for watching. The end.